first leg of the trip, we decided we were all going to meet up in Seattle. So there was 3 riders originally, which is myself, Bob and Brian, and then a 4th rider, a guy named Justin, who lives in Seattle. We took 2 days to get out of town, just because we thought it would take a matter of 6 hours to get all of our food and get all the gear that we needed. That's not the way it went. So we all rendezvoused in Seattle and then set sail for Anchorage, Alaska. We got to the Canadian border, it was 11 o'clock at night. They raised an eyebrow and they put us in the you're gonna get searched line, and we ended up getting searched for well after midnight, actually. We expect that in some of the border crossings that we're going to. We did not expect that out of Canada. Once we finally got through the Canadian border, then we wound up in a little town called Abbotsford. And we just picked a little place, Best Western, and we were just happy to be in Canada, have our first border crossing under our belt. We set out for a place called 100 Mile, and then there's a town called Dawson Creek, which is actually the southern part of the Alcan Highway, which is the beginning of the Alcan Highway. We turned just before that. This is the off the beaten path trail. That's the path that's going to take us to the Stewart Highway, which is, in my opinion, the most rural way to get up to Alaska. We stopped at a place called Dease Lake, and Dease Lake has a sign that lasts services for, I'll call it 150 miles. We each had our own little log cabin. They had a wood burning stove on inside each one, which really warmed up the place nicely. That was our first real camping experience. And it turned out to be fantastic. And we had got some guns before leaving the US, so it was our first time to break out the guns. And it was a great campsite, and we had the whole world all to ourselves. So after leaving Dease Lake, we went northbound, and we're now leaving British Columbia and we're coming up into Yukon Territory. Once we got to an area where the Alcan continues into Alaska, we actually went north because our whole objective was to hit the Dempster Highway. And the Dempster Highway is pretty well known within the motorcycle communities as being one of the most remote and great rides within North America. Once we made the turn off of the main road, just prior to reaching the city of Dawson, we're on the Dempster Highway, and it instantly turns to gravel, and the road is fine. And so we're trudging along, and again, it's almost 24-hour daylight, but we're trudging along, and we hit Tombstone National Park. We said, you know what, let's just stop kind of early on. It was kind of midday, but let's just stop, build a camp, and that way we can kind of size up the weather and kind of see how it goes. We picked a site right along this river, roaring water through this whole evening. And then we built a couple big fires. We had several campsites, one primary one, but we slept kind of scattered because we had the privacy of the park to ourselves. And then the next morning we got up early, and beautiful day, and there was a debate. They said, well, we're gonna be riding up and coming back here. It's a beautiful day. Why don't we just leave our stuff? I didn't like that idea at all. But we had a debate. I lost, and we said, okay, let's just leave our stuff. Well, we get up to Eagle Plains. Beautiful day. We do a whole stop at the Arctic Circle. There's a great sign there. We flew the drone. We had to have a beer at the Arctic Circle, and a couple guys took their clothes off and ran around the Arctic Circle, and there's a little novelty with that. So we just enjoyed it as long as we could. And then when we turned around to go back, beautiful day, 200 miles back again, and as we get about 30 miles into our beautiful day home from the Arctic Circle, the sky went to gray to black to white out snow in a moment. And so about 2 hours into the ride, my hands are frozen, my feet are frozen, my left foot is entirely frozen because it's waterlogged with freezing water, and I had about 1 inch of water in my boot, and I had this death grip on my bike that I couldn't wait to get off it, but I had about 5 more hours to go of hanging on to this thing until we finally got to the campsite at Tombstone National Park again. We fought the battle, and nobody got hurt, nobody went off the road, everybody was frozen to the core, and my Uncle Glenn has been great to have him along for many different reasons. That day in particular has been fantastic because when he stepped out of his warm truck, he got out and he made a big fire right away. And so we all stripped out of our wet clothes, put dry clothes on, and sat around the fire. And it was the best fire I probably have been around in my entire life. I read a long time ago that the definition of adventure is when the outcome is uncertain. And that day was definitely an adventure. Finishing the road to the Arctic Circle and then coming back down to the bottom of the Dempster Highway, we got back on Route 2 and made our way towards Alaska, ultimately trying to reach Anchorage. First, when we left the Dempster Highway, we came to the town of Dawson. Dawson City is an old mining town, and it is a time warp back to the 1800s. I mean, all they did to maintain the town is they just kept putting on coats of paint. The buildings are still elevated from all the horse debris that would come down the road. Everything's elevated, a few feet off. And it is, the old double slinging doors as you walk into saloons, and it's not for tourist appeal. It's the way it was, and it's the way that it is. And you can very much feel that in the town. And so there's a thing called Kiss the Sour Toe. And what it is, there's the downtown hotel in Dawson City, and what it is, it's this mummified toe that somebody had cut off, and they donate their toes to this bar. And what you do is you got to take the toe, you put it in at least 80 proof whiskey, and they have this whole thing that they do with this woman in a hat, and they say it's a poem that they say before everybody does it, and they give you the toe, they give you the liquor, and they put this mummified toe in your drop of whiskey, and you have to drink it, and it's got to touch your lips. And that's how you do it. And so we just happen to be sitting in the bar. They only do it like on Thursday nights at 5 o'clock or whatever time it is. And they also pull out these plastic, or these laminated sheets of paper that they put it in your face that if you damage the toe, if you swallow the toe, if you steal the toe, if you do anything with the toe, it's a minimum of a $5,000 fine, or whatever it is. The number escapes me now, but it's a pretty stiff penalty. It's a couple $1,000s. And they're serious about the toe. They love their toe. And so as we did the whole presentation, which was incredibly weird, but I would totally do it again and recommend anybody do it because it's kind of a cool experience. If I had to pick one place that was my favorite of all the 18,000 miles that we've done so far, it'd be hard for me to answer that question, but Dawson City would be a contender for one of the coolest places that we've encountered in our lap around the world so far. We got on a ferry and then made our way to the top of the World Highway. Once we got on top of the World Highway, our destination was Tok. But we had to go via the top of the World Highway through a town called Chicken. And the reason it's called Chicken is because they have a lot of ptarmigans running around. And ptarmigan is a little small chicken, basically. But because they were afraid of not being able to spell ptarmigan with a P, they just said, well, let's just call it Chicken. So we pulled up to one of the bars, started talking to the owner, and where are you going? We said, well, we're heading to Tok and then up to Fairbanks and eventually down to Anchorage. She said, this time of year, don't go to Fairbanks, you need to be going to Valdez. Valdez is a nice ride. There's not gonna be a lot of traffic this time of year, and it's one of the best places in all of Alaska. And so she quickly convinced us that we need to go to Valdez. That was great advice. The ride was fantastic. We finally make our way to Valdez. So what do we want to do in Valdez, Alaska? We want to go check out some glaciers. We ended up going through this icebreaker boat and going through these canals, and man, it was awesome. It's like they're kind of happy that you stopped in their little slice of the world and they want to show it to you. We ended up sitting up front with the captain. He gives a lot of history of the area. The history of the Valdez, the Exxon Valdez crash, everything that ensued afterwards with the fallout. But as we got to the front of the glacier, there are seals everywhere, all the chunks of ice coming by the boat. And to get this captain's narrative with, all of our cameras going, we're all hanging out the sides of the boat, looking, on the sides and the front of these icebergs. Now, we couldn't get right up to the face of the glacier, the way that the chunks were coming down. Even being a mile from it and seeing the ice come off of it and seeing the waves and all the ice that's coming by the boat and all the seals that were on it, it was an awesome, awesome day. After being on the road for a month and covering several thousand miles and being in, the backcountry for so long, it was kind of weird to be in a big city all of a sudden. But it was also kind of nice too to have all the amenities of a big city. We dropped our stuff, finally got to do a load of laundry and all the kind of logistic stuff that we were all happy and couldn't wait to do. We then left the next morning for Talkeetna. Talkeetna, again, is another little time warp in a different kind of way. It's just these mom and pop shops. All it is bars and restaurants, little knick-knack shops for the tourists, but it's full of character. So we hopped in this airplane. We went with a place called McKinley Scenic Flights. We hopped in what's called a Beaver, and this is a candy apple red Beaver airplane. And we took off and we took a scenic flight around Denali, Mount McKinley, and then we landed on a glacier. Man, it was one of the coolest things ever. The pilot had a geologist background. We're flying around massive mountain peaks. He's given a geologist's technical point of view of the rock formation. So anyway, as we're on the Beaver, we're on the airplane and we're looking at the landing spot, the pilot points out the landing spot and he says, "You see that little red dot down there? That's another one of our planes. We're gonna land right beside that." And as soon as we landed, the skis grabbed and it kind of stuck and he had to really goose it, give a lot of power just to keep the momentum so that we didn't kind of sink in. And he got to a part where he could actually stop. And then because they stop with the takeoff in mind. So they want to get kind of uphill so they can get the uphill spot so they can get a downhill run for the takeoff. And to watch him do that from a pilot point of view was very, very impressive. We had about 30 minutes on the glacier to really just, take some pictures. You're not supposed to fly a drone there. I've heard that some people may have flown a drone there. It would not be in the best interest of some people to do that legally, so I don't know why anybody would ever do that, but it has been done before. When we were in Anchorage, there's a place called the Motorcycle Shop. The motorcycle shop is run by a guy named Chris, and Chris is a former Marine, and that guy really knows how to take care of his people, because when we went in there just for a tire change, he's like, anything I can do to help you guys. So he offered up storage for a very, very fair price. He didn't charge us anything for the storage. He gave us a free set of tires, and I cannot say enough about that guy, Chris. And that was end of all roads, leg one.